Hello, if you are looking at doing coral bleaching for your project topic, this is the video for you. We're talking about coral bleaching. What I'm going to do is walk you through all these sources so that you can kind of see my perspective on it and kind of like how I sequence information, and I can point out what I think is good and bad or places you should spend more time or less time, and hopefully help you answer your questions really well and just make a really good project. If you need help though with this and you're confused, just let me know. We're going to actually start with this first, or with this bottom one here about basic info on coral reefs in case you don't know. So this site is just a basic intro to what a coral reef even is. They're actually ecosystems, and corals are like these little animals that live inside of what essentially looks like a rock skeleton, and they just pile up on this big reef. The corals are actually a little animal that's living inside, and a lot of corals have symbiotic relationships with things like planktons and things like that, or algae. So here it tells you, right, there are these polyps of these corals, and they contain this algae called zooxanthellae, and those actually exist in a symbiotic relationship with the animal. Basically, the polyps give the algae a place to live, and the algae kind of like lives inside of these like little fingers here that are sticking out, and it does photosynthesis and gets its food and stuff, and then some of the extra food that's produced in that photosynthesis process actually goes to the coral, and that's how the coral gets some of its food. It's also kind of how the coral gets color from the algae. The coral polyps are actually transparent, it says, right? And then the color of the algae gives them the color. So there's more information here if you want to read about different types of corals, because not all corals are stony. That's just what we mostly know as the ones that are in reefs, right? Some other different types of corals. And then here are some major places where there are coral reefs, and why are they important? Here's some information here. The biggest thing is reefs provide habitat for a lot of different species. Incredibly diverse amounts of species use coral reefs for home and for food, and those things are in places where people usually, get food also. So that's important. Corals also are, they're good for recreation. People like to go there. They actually also protect some of the areas around them from dangerous storms and hurricanes and water-related things. So corals are pretty great. So that's the basic information. Mr. Baumann's brother is, Dr. Baumann is a coral reef scientist, so he wanted me to share that with y'all. What the heck is coral bleaching? So coral bleaching is basically, here's what a healthy coral looks like, right? It's like this branching thing, kind of looks like a brain, and it's got these happy little polyps and these happy little algae in there. The coral and the algae are hanging out. When the coral gets stressed out, what happens is the algae's like, we got to go. This coral's not providing us with what we need anymore. Like, we got to go and get food. When the temperature in the ocean increases, that stresses out the coral, so the algae leaves. And then what you're left with is the coral is left bleached and vulnerable. So this coral can still be alive, and it can still recover, but oftentimes when you come across white coral like this, it's actually skeletal remains. There's no longer the animal in there, right? So the coral loses its major source of food, turns white, very pale, and is more susceptible to disease. So these corals can get sick. So how does it happen? How does coral bleaching happen? Well, here are the major causes, right? Change in ocean temperature, runoff and pollution, overexposure of sunlight, and extremely low tides. So the big thing that we're going to be kind of looking at here is this change in ocean temperature. So warmer water temperatures can result in coral bleaching. When it's too warm, the coral kicks out the algae, basically. It's like, hey, I can't provide for you anymore. You got to go. It's not quite dead. It can survive, but it's under a lot more stress. So we actually can measure the stress of coral by looking at and counting and measuring what's white and what's healthy. So this is actually what Dr. Baumann does. Mr. Brown's older brother, he does these things. So when the water gets too hot, the coral is sad. But coral also likes tropical environments, so it's actually very sensitive to temperatures. So coral is one of the leading things. It's like, hey, climate change is happening, watch out, because coral is very sensitive to temperature change. So something to think about, and you can kind of read a little bit more about that. So not all bleaching events are due to warm weather. Here it says there's some bleaching from cold weather. That's pretty wild, right? So that's that first one. This diagram helps to kind of explain it. So you might want to drop that on like your second slide after your intro or after your title slide, just to kind of show people what the heck is coral bleaching. You can just screenshot it, do you like that? Just whoop, and then slap it on there. Okay, put it in your project. Make sure you cite your sources though. Okay, here's the next one. This is an article on coral bleaching written by the Australian government, and in Australia or near Australia is the Great Barrier Reef, world's largest coral reef, and you can kind of see how they talk a little bit about what is coral bleaching. So we didn't answer the how is this happening yet. The how is this happening, right? Or not how is it happening. How do we know? The how do we know is like literally some corals turning white. How, like what's happening? Here's what's happening, right? How are we getting that information? We're literally going and looking at it. So this one's a lot easier how than most of the other ones, which are like complicated sciencey stuff where we're like using satellites and making measurements and doing data. But this one, we're literally like, we can see it happening. So that's a thing. Okay, so anyway, here it tells you bleaching, what bleaching is, which we talked about. What causes the bleaching? The most common cause is sustained heat stress, which is occurring more frequently as our climate changes and as the ocean becomes warmer. So global temperature goes up. The water is going to then absorb more energy from that extra heat, and it's going to keep that extra heat in it, basically, which is going to raise water temperatures, especially near the surface, which is bad for the corals because they live near the surface. Can they does coral die from bleaching? It doesn't mean death, but yeah, they can. Recovery is hard, and they're going to be more susceptible to disease. And if these corals get sick and they die, then there goes your healthy environment for your happy sea critters, right? So here's another picture of healthy coral. Here's a picture of bleached coral, and then here's a picture of dead coral. So coral that's actually green is turfed in algae, which means the algae, like not the algae that was living inside of it, but like grassy algae sticks to the outside and makes like a slimy covering, and you kind of see that picture there of what that looks like underwater. So what's the current situation in the barrier reef? So this is an article from at least 2017 telling you a little bit about the barrier reef. You can actually kind of see how it's changing, and it'll tell you a little bit about it and what the bleaching is like. Basically, every reef in the world is going to have the same type of data. There's more coral bleaching happening. So this graph is actually from our ocean temperatures group. You can see as the ocean temperature is rising through time here from 1880 to 2017 or 2016, sorry. So temperature's rising, that's 1900, I'm sorry. That's really small. So the temperature has been rising a bit. So we're up almost a whole degree, which doesn't seem like very much, but it's a ton when you're a coral. Corals are very sensitive, right? So if the average temperature is increased by a degree, then that means that coral might not be able to live there anymore. And so then the corals are bleaching, and that's not so good. So then here's some stuff about how they respond to it in that particular place in Australia. So that's pretty neat for you to look at. I just thought you could use a source from somewhere that wasn't, the United States, because we don't have any corals, really. All right, here's another one. How does climate affect coral reefs? This is a really busy picture. There's a lot of things happening here. It's kind of walking you through all the different ways it can happen. So the first one here, ocean warming. Thermal stress causes coral bleaching, right? Sea level rise also adds more sediment to the water, which causes the coral not to be able to get sunlight, which is bad and causes it to bleach. Storms can damage the coral. It can cause it to bleach. They're under stress when there's a storm because there's lots of water moving and things are changing and their environment changes. It's like, when we put you on home instruction, you're like, holy crap, this is so different. Change in precipitation, right? The same thing with the storms, really. Like if you change the way the environment is around the coral, it's going to get stressed, it's going to get bleached. Altered ocean currents. If the ocean current changes, that can stress it out because maybe now it's receiving cold water from the west instead of warm water. And then ocean acidification as a result of increasing carbon dioxide. That's a big one. So here's the three that matter the most to us for climate change. Warming ocean, altered currents, and ocean acidification. So warming ocean. Ocean gets warmer as you add more. So more CO2 in the atmosphere is more of a greenhouse gas, increases the temperature of the atmosphere. Warmer air is going to make warmer oceans because the water's going to absorb that heat. Warmer oceans, thermal stress on your corals. Boom. Next thing, CO2 in the atmosphere. Some of it is going to get pulled into the ocean because the ocean actually pulls things from the air, right? It's going to pull CO2 in, which actually makes the ocean slightly acidic. So if you reduce the pH, make it lower because lower is more acidic, it's actually going to make it really hard for the coral to grow because corals actually secrete the rocky shell that they live inside of. And if they can't do that, if they can't produce it because it's made of calcium and calcium dissolves in acid, then they're not going to be able to live, right? So more acidification causes stress. So warming, acidification cause stress. The last one, ocean currents are changing as the temperatures are changing around the world. So if surface temperatures of the ocean are changing, then your warm water is cycling differently. If you're melting more ice, then your cold water is cycling more differently. And that's going to cause your currents to change, which is going to also affect your corals, right? So all these things are caused by climate change. And then over here are some things you can do to help. So if you're looking at what can we do, there's some things that you can do, right? So these are the basics, right? Drive less, reduce, reuse, recycle, use energy efficient stuff, don't print as much, don't use water, that kind of stuff. But what can you do for your reef? You and I in Ohio are not going to affect coral reefs terribly much. But what we can do is be mindful of what we do globally to just limit climate change at all, right? So what we do locally can affect the global environment. Now, if you as one person start riding your bike to school every day, you're probably not going to save the coral reefs. But if lots of people do it, then we could, So down here is another explanation. Climate change is the greatest global threat to coral reefs, right? And we already talked about why coral reefs are great, because some of you are like, well, who gives a crap? We don't have them in Ohio, but they do matter. All right, last thing. Coral bleaching. So here's more explanations. Again, what is coral bleaching? Can coral recover? The answer is yes. What causes it? Here's some stuff that tells you how. And these are pretty pictures. And that's a really nice picture of what it looks like when coral gets bleached. See how it's white? Okay. So there's some things. Here is this is another Australian government one. So how is the Great Barrier Reef affected in Australia? Here's some explanation, some nice pictures of that. You can actually use these to kind of see where the bleaching is happening if you want. What can we do? We got to choose, right? This is a global crisis. So there's a lot of things you can think about with like what can happen in the future. What are the effects? Think about like the future of the habitats, the things that are living there, the people that might live using those resources, and then think about like what can we do to kind of reduce our impact globally. And it might not be, again, like what you and I do like on a daily, but like what can we globally do to try to make a difference in this climate change situation. So hopefully that helps you. Coral reefs are really interesting, and looks like really kind of fun thing to study. So maybe one day we'll have Mr. Baumann's brother on for a chat with us. All right, see you later.